Great. So you can hear me well.
Yes.
I'll start. Yeah, I spent about the last 6 months in the Maharashtra State Archives, which are in Fort. The archives are maybe the one of the certainly one of the richest archive richest sources for historical documents in India, and they hold the records, many of the records of the Bombay presidency. So the British political authority that governed the western coast of India, but also in the period that I'm talking about from the 1839 to 1937, also the city of Aden in Yemen. I'm going. So can you see the slides that I'm showing? Yeah, okay. So I want to talk a little bit about the geography of Aden, which is very unusual. So I'm going to show you this. Hopefully you'll see do you see a picture of the city of Aden? So this is a kind of topographical map. And in the are you seeing a map on your screen?
So, and Mark, it's still just showing the links, the geography
Okay.
background slide.
Okay. So do you see it now?
Now it's visible.
Okay. So this is the southern tip. You do see it, yeah? Okay. This is the southern tip of the Arabian Peninsula. And you can see that this is it's a very mountainous area. So the dark brown bits in the center are the highest mountains. They're um, around 3,000 meters, I guess, 8,000 feet. That's where the capital city. That's the northern part of Yemen is very mountainous. Also quite green, which it seems counterintuitive when we're talking about the Arabian Peninsula, which has this very large desert region. Uh, you see the coast there. The What I like about this map is you see the very stark difference in elevation between the coasts and the inland parts of Yemen. So there is a plain that stretches around the coast. Um, right around here, you had an ancient port that was called Mocha, is still there, but the city of Mocha became identified with the coffee trade, which is why and even became a brand of kind of high quality coffee, and that coffee was and is one of the major commodities that was traded from Yemen, from the interior of Yemen. Um, and then eventually, the British set up their commercial entrepot in this right where my cursor is, down in what looks like a little island, but is actually an extinct volcano. It is a tiny little piece of land that's connected by a very narrow, like 1,500 meter isthmus to the mainland. And that is where so the city of Aden was not invented by the British. It was there. It was a port that had various periods of efflorescence in its history, but by the 19th century, by the early 19th century, was very much just an insignificant village, fishing village, really. Um, and so the British had, at the turn of the 19th century, they had a factory, or what they called a factory, but a sort of trading depot in Mocha, that is up on this side on the western side of the western coast of the peninsula. And they ran into various problems in Mocha that led them to start floating the idea of building their own a city under their own control uh, in elsewhere in the Arabian Peninsula. This is an old Dutch. The Dutch were already active in Mocha. This is just an illustration of the shipping trade outside of the city of Mocha. Um, in Mocha, we had already years, even many decades or even centuries before the British arrived, there were Indians, originally Gujarati traders who settled down in various places in these coastal Arabian trading cities. Also they were also active on the coast of East Africa, who were called Banyan or from Vanias. These are travelers engravings depicting some of these Hindu merchant families that lived in places like Mocha and elsewhere on the Arabian Peninsula. This is the factory at Mocha or the British trading post at Mocha. In 1818, or in this period from 1818 to 1820, there was a crisis in Mocha where the political authority in the mountainous the highlands of Yemen, the Imam, who's called the Imam, a kind of theological and political leader. His agent in Mocha humiliated a British officer by, I think, forcing him to, I think, he stripped him naked and also, more importantly, forced him to travel around without a hat and abused him in various ways. This triggered a kind of diplomatic crisis, and the one of the figures who was sort of made an example or was pointed to as the source of this was one of these Banyan brokers, one of these Gujarati families, someone named Bimji Kalyanji, who was accused of double dealing, of making one deal with the British and another deal with the Imam in Sana'a, and trying to benefit from both. So one of this, I have this quotation: "BMG, the broker, is a treacherous and perfidious man. He may attempt to misrepresentation to create ill will between the two states for the sake of advantageously promoting his own affairs." So in order to show, to make a show of strength, the British bombarded the port of Mocha, and there was increasing pressure to pull up stakes at Mocha and establish a trading port elsewhere. At the same time, I should say this is not long after Napoleon Bonaparte invaded Egypt. So the British government was very, very apprehensive about a French plot to kind of interfere with their access to India in by means of the Red Sea. And then we have various. The other thing is, so that one of the things that was addressed in this time period was that the idea that these Hindu traders in Mocha and elsewhere were sort of needed some sort of imperial protection in order to conduct business. So these are some quotations I found in the archive. The Banyans residing under the different Arab governments in the Red Sea, particularly among the something tribes, have been ever treated and held in the same contemptible light as the Jews were by the once no less intolerable, he means intolerant, Christian nations. They are consequently the objects of derision, insult, and oppression with no more civil and political influence than what their command of money and the ease with which they are terrified out of it gives them. After what I've here stated, can government continue to employ a people to guard our public interests who are incapable of supporting their own, who may have to plead if they dare for an insulted captain or a plundered merchant one day and submit to fine, imprisonment, and even torture the next? So there was also a sense among some in the British establishment or in different parts of the British establishment that there was a need to create a kind of mercantile environment that would be amenable to these to basically to um, Indian merchants. Who were not were subject, in their view, to various sorts of arbitrary and capricious taxation and harassment by Arab authorities. Um, Aden Aden had two essentially two very different functions, and the rulers of Aden never really, and in a sense, these two functions were at cross purposes. They didn't, they were very different, and individual politicians and other players in Aden often pursued one of these two goals at the expense of the other. The first was a strategic or military base. We hope we shall not be considered as departing from the proper sphere of our duty and pointing to the extreme importance of the occupation of Aden as the passage or barrier in a military point of view between Europe and India in the event of a European war. Aden was meant to be a fort, a military fortification that would protect the route between India and England, and mainly in the event of a French, some sort of French aggressive campaign. I think further back in their minds were the Russians and also the Americans. Yeah, and so in the second quotation, I'll just say a combination of European power with these Arab tribes is no phantom of our own imagination. We need only give the following quotation from a letter. A rumor was very prevalent in Mocha that in the event of a war with France, arrangements had been made that a simultaneous attack should be made upon Aden. So not only was there in their minds was there the possibility of a French advance on Aden, but the French were actively trying to make alliances with the Arab tribes in the region, and the Arab tribes were also disposed to plunder these British ports. So the man who was put in charge of Aden, and it was very much his sort of obsession, was a low-level commander in the Indian Navy named Stafford Bettesworth Haynes, who had been sort of kicking around the Red Sea area as a sailor since he was a teenager. Um, and certainly was familiar with the situation, had spent a lot of time in Mocha, he was quite keen on taking over Aden and making it into a British port city, or building it up as a British port city. Haynes was a very unusual character, certainly in the a kind of rude, but had a lot of. He also made very close. He essentially worked through a network of local merchants who he trusted and kind of who he also favored. He talked a lot about how he was trying to create a kind of free trade environment for the various merchants who Hindu and Arab and Jewish merchants who who were active in Aden, but he also was quite a protectionist in the sense that he very much was willing to bend the facts to benefit the people, those merchants who were closest to him. These included mainly local Arab merchants, but also some Parsi merchants from India. Haynes was constantly butting heads with the military. So basically, no, the British government set up Aden essentially for there's a complicated story behind it, but the British seized Aden from the local sultan in 1839. And it's important to note that Aden and the area right around it, that is at the sort of southern tip of the Arabian Peninsula, had already um, seceded from the main sort of political the main country of what was then Yemen, which in the north. And this was one of the things that made it attractive to the British. So Haynes cultivated good relationships with he tried very much tried and ultimately succeeded to ingratiate the British to the local sultans in the surrounding area. Um, he also butted heads quite vigorously with the military authorities in Aden. So Aden was a garrison, and I'll get into the building of the garrison. It was built by indentured laborers from Mumbai and the surrounding area, the Konkan coast. But sorry, so it was built by these people, but uh, uh, the British were never there were quite a few elements of the British government and even in the East India Company itself who thought that building Aden was a very bad idea and a very just a giant waste of money. So so there was a lot of resentment towards the idea, the very idea of Aden, and because Haynes was sort of such a pain as a person, ultimately he was the one who was sacrificed for all of this you know, displeasure with the idea of Aden. And he was there was also a lot of there was really Aden the sort of office politics of Aden of this backwater outpost of the British Empire in the 1840s was very toxic with there were sort of too many authorities. There was a military authority. Despite the fact that Haynes was a military man, he was a very low-ranking officer, so he was constantly telling officers of a higher rank than him what to do, which they, as you can imagine, did not appreciate. Um, and ultimately that came back to haunt him. So, for example, so these are two governor generals of India under Harding. In the you see, Henry Harding was a sort of a backer of Haynes. Haynes backer of Haynes and a backer of the idea of Aden. But by the time Elphinstone, not the first Elphinstone, the second Elphinstone, John Elphinstone, was governor of Bombay in the 1850s, he resolved to take Haynes out, not only to take Haynes out, but to bring him down. So Haynes actually, while he, in a very real sense, is sort of responsible for the emergence of Aden as a kind of important port in the world. By the 1950s, Aden was there's a quotation that's often repeated in many sources. You take it with a grain of salt, but that Aden was the second busiest port in the world to New York City. by the 1950s, and all ship traffic between Asia and Europe was going through the port of Aden. And in fact, you could not insure a cargo on a cargo ship without taking the shortest possible route, which was between Singapore and Antwerp was Aden, or between the Far East and Europe. So all of the shipping was being funneled through this. And I should mention that when the Suez Canal was opened in 1869, that certainly changed the picture. In many ways, vindicated Haynes's view of Aden as a free port. But Elphinstone, Haynes was also, in addition to being kind of a difficult person, was not a very good bookkeeper. In fact, a lot of these military men in Aden were not up to the level of bookkeeping that the government in Bombay demanded and expected. And so there was a shortfall. There was a discrepancy. There was some money missing from the government funds. So the government account, or actually cash that was missing. Haynes was tried in Bombay and ultimately acquitted, but then Elphinstone was really determined to, as he put it, make him boil. So he ended up going to a debtor's prison in Mumbai, and spent most of the remainder of his life there. He was released shortly before he died. Okay, so in terms of early Aden was the people who were there in terms of the population. You had some European troops, right, who were the officers in the Indian Army. You had successive waves of conscripts or enlisted men in the army or the navy or the military of the Bombay Presidency, and also in others of also from Madras, who were coming and going to serve in a military function in Aden. One thing that emerges from the archives, the archives of the Bombay Presidency, that don't really see so much in the those archives that survive in the UK, is that there were thousands of workers who were brought from Mumbai, who were a permanent labor force in the city. So they built the fortifications, they built the barracks, they built government buildings, all these sorts of things. There were also there were Jews. These were Jews who came from most of them. The vast majority came from the interior of Yemen. There were also, once the British started spending a lot of money building Aden, they also came from the interior as labor migrants and worked in construction. The same was true of Arab Yemenis. There were some already in the town who kind of got in early. But there were also waves of immigration throughout Aden's history from or a part of just a general pattern of urbanization coming from the interior of Yemen. The main difference between the two groups was that the Jews didn't own agricultural land in the interior of Yemen. So in a sense, they were a more mobile labor force than the Arabs, who had to tend to their crops, their fields. So So often the flows of labor from the interior of Yemen were timed to the harvests. There was always a an influx and outflux of Somalis. The Gulf of Aden is directly across, or Aden is directly across the Gulf of Aden from the trading city of the fair of Berbera, which is in Somalia, where for even certainly even before Aden was established, this was a major trading post where Gujarati traders would come across and trade piece goods, that is ready-made clothing that was manufactured in various parts of Gujarat in for materials from the interior of Africa, yeah, ivory, gold, and various types of incense, a lot of different pelts from various animals, some of which are no longer no longer existing as species. Um, and let's see. There were also, as I mentioned, there were also Parsi merchants who came and set up shop in Aden and various types of businesses, and Bohras from Gujarat. Although the Bohras, because they have a historical connection to Yemen, this was something that was evoked much later in the national during the sort of heyday of Arab nationalism. They were able to say, "Well, we are actually from Yemen originally," which is true. But they used this to argue for their indigenous status. And then there were a lot of very kind of shady characters who found their way to Aden from all over the world, really, and tried to make their living there. So Aden was very hot, is very hot, and there's no shade of any sort. The area to the north in the inland was at this time in the mid 19th century was forested, and they used it. That's where they brought timber and firewood for fuel. Uh, but there was not much water there, so supplying water was a drinkable water was a major logistical problem for the British in Aden. It's also in it's but despite the lack of water, it is also prone to flash flooding, which is something that's happened in the last couple of days in Aden. So devastating flash floods. Was an There were fires that were difficult to put out because of the wind and the lack of water. Most Almost everything had to be imported from elsewhere. Also, the Indians, the workers who were brought from India they were working with stone. They were masons or assistants to stonemasons. And the stone in Aden was very easy to it shattered into sharp pieces. So workers were often getting injured by sharp shards of stone, and then these wounds would become infected, and that was a major source of deaths in the working population of Aden. Uh, Even though, so this is the era of the steamship. There were steamships, but the steamships in this period were really in short supply, and the military had dibs on them. So the civilian authorities in Aden, meaning Haynes and his lackeys, had to rely on what are called country craft or yeah, sort of old-fashioned sailing ships, which meant that the trip from between Bombay and Aden was very long and difficult. Um, and it was also this, of course, compounded the issue of logistics and bringing things there. There was also because the settlement at Aden was under constant scrutiny for being for sort of hemorrhaging money from the authorities in Bombay and in the British authorities and in England. Haynes, there was also a an ongoing kind of or running argument about what is the best building material or how should structures be built in this environment. There are so at various points they were built in a very kind of flimsy way with materials, reeds and mats and things that were cheap and easy to put up, and in a later period there was a move towards more substantial stone buildings. The Deputy Assistant Commissary General describes the situation of Aden in terms of supplies. Aden is worse off than a ship, for a ship can fetch her own supplies, whereas those in Aden must be brought here at the most exorbitant rates, and which are greatly increased whenever the Arabs think proper to stop supplies, which, from all I can learn, is a circumstance of yearly occurrence. So much of the food and fuel that Aden needed was imported from the interior of Yemen, but the authorities and also just Bedouin tribes on the interior found out that they could really shake down the settlement by putting a halt to that at strategic intervals. Okay, so as far as that 4,000 laborers who were in or coming were Indian laborers who were in Aden, we know a little bit about them. They were described in very unflattering terms by the various military authorities and also civilian authorities in Yemen as people who could not were unable to find work in or around Bombay. So they were really workers who had more skills and more, let's say, more choice in where they would go would be much more likely to choose work in Mauritius than they would to come to Aden. Of course, that on the spectrum of awful jobs that indentured Indian workers could get, Aden seems to have been the absolute worst. So they were largely in debt. And so they were enticed to go to Aden essentially with an advance of 1 or 2 months' salary. And as you can imagine, once these very poor indebted workers got their advance, their inclination was to often to pay off their debts, in which case the advance certainly didn't help them in the way that it was that the authorities intended it to help them pay for their way to Aden. Um, or they just disappeared, right? So there was a problem of how to make them show up when it's time to get on the ship and go to Aden. There were also a lot of other types of problems that the British complained about. People who said that they were master stonemasons, but turned out to be either not even the person they claimed to be, or instead some sort of substitute, some sort of patsy who was put in the last minute. or someone who, in fact, had no, advanced building experience. There was a constant struggle with language barriers, so the British couldn't understand the workers. Often the workers couldn't understand one another because they came from different parts of India where they spoke different languages. And it took it there were various experiments to try to put workers together with other to have them work in groups where they at least spoke the same language. Um, but yeah, and I mentioned that people fake their qualifications. In the picture that I have up here, there was a system, a very elaborate system of cisterns that was dug out of the rock in by one of the pre-Islamic South Arabian civilizations. We're not really sure which one, but it holds something like a million gallons of water. So it's intended to harness this water from flash floods and use it for various purposes, human purposes. And so one of the things that the British did was, so this was discovered in the 1850s by a British officer who was sort of out for a walk in the mountains surrounding Aden, and it became eventually so workers who were not who the British felt were not really qualified to do much were sort of put to work excavating these and renovating these cisterns. They're what are called the tanks, and these were seen as a sort of Aden, an Arabian equivalent of the Ajanta caves, or a kind of miraculous place from the past that was being renovated. So they were put on this as a kind of essentially as busy work. They were put to work excavating and renovating these ancient cisterns, which became kind of a main tourist attraction once in a later period when passenger ships docked in Aden on their way between India and okay. So I mentioned some of the medical problems. The workers slept on the ground. In the middle of the 19th century, this was seen as an extremely risky, medically as an extremely risky kind of activity to be sleeping on the damp ground, and many of their health problems that they developed were attributed to this. So that was a constant sort of worry for managers, I guess, in Aden. Also, what they called ulcers, or which were essentially infected wounds from working with stone, which would normally on these Indian workers' legs. Scurvy was a problem. So even though you start to read, even in the earliest period, we read about distribution of lime juice, and which certainly should help. We know that scurvy is a vitamin C deficiency that should have helped, but scurvy really was not everybody bought. It was still a controversial idea that that certain foods would actually help with scurvy. So scurvy was a problem throughout the early history of Aden. And there were various attempts to bring fresh fruit and vegetables, sometimes all the way from Bombay, or from the interior of the country. Interestingly, it was assumed that Indian workers needed fruits and vegetables in their diet, but Europeans seemed to only need alcohol and meat. Those were the sort of food groups for the Europeans resident in Aden. There were various so supplying fresh meat from mostly from Somalia and all of these different dietary supplements. Was the main way think that a lot of Indian Parsi Indian and Parsi Hindu and Jewish merchants made their fortunes in Aden. One of the things that went terribly wrong was in that they were supplying ghee from the British were supplying ghee from Somalia. And in the picture, you can see some Somali sheep who are going to be sold in Saudi Arabia for the Eid. And if you notice something unusual about the anatomy of these Somali sheep is that they have very fat tails, and so this was one. Melting down the fat from these fat tails was cheaper than producing ghee from actual butter. So there was a problem of the ghee being either mixed, adulterated with animal fat from the sheep, or even being exclusively animal fat. And this, interestingly, this was one of the issues where the both the Hindus and the Jews were on the same side of this debate because neither would eat the Berbera ghee. Yeah, so we don't know much about what we don't really hear from these workers who were Indian workers in Aden. There is the closest we get is a conversation that a British officer had with a labor broker in Mumbai, and then in 1852, and then some of the laborers themselves. Is that what he said? So no one goes to Aden from choice. These are people who are in debt or can't get constant employment in India. The 2 months advance pay allows us either to pay down our debts or send our wives and family to our home villages while we were gone. And then they had essentially these workers had a list of grievances, which are eminently reasonable complaints. We want to be able to send remittances home. We don't want to pay for passage to and from Aden, that is for travel expenses, which they were made to pay. We want sufficient notice of when the ships are going to leave for Aden. We want an advance to buy cooking utensils because the other thing that the merchants, the Parsi and Jewish and Hindu merchants did was that they were able to lend money to these destitute workers at very high rates of interest, and also charge them high prices for things like pots to cook food in and other things. So they wanted a bigger luggage allowance so they could bring these pots and pans with them. The food in Aden was expensive, and often the workers would get into debt with the local banyans for food. Labor brokers, or who are called a variety of things, who are often from the same sort of ethnic or linguistic community as the workers themselves, would take money from them, sometimes in an official way and sometimes in a non-official way. They had to work on Sundays and holidays, right? So they didn't want to work on religious festivals. They didn't want to work on Sundays, and they wanted to be able to leave, right? So they were on contracts. They weren't able to leave. There were some some instances of Indian workers defecting, essentially going into the interior of Yemen. Sometimes they were caught, and when they were caught, they had they had money from other workers, like they were trying to go back to India and distribute money that various workers had earned in their work. Okay, so this changes the thing that changes this situation is actually the railroad in India. So the railroad, and this is something I'm only starting to get into, but the work on the railroad in India paid better than this sort of throwing one's lot into indentured labor in Aden. So it drove up the prices in the drove up the cost of labor in general. So here is a letter to Lord Elphinstone in 1859. By raising the rates given in the Public Works Department with those given by the railway authorities, it appears that we could draw the workmen from that department. But even if that was not a mere shifting of the difficulty from one department to another, it is probable that such a proceeding would lead to a permanent increase in wages, right? And he thinks this is a very bad thing and a very difficult thing. So there were various attempts to deal with this in ways that would not that would not involve giving the Indian workers in Aden more pay. Can we use convicts? That was quickly ruled out. Can we use Arabs? Can we use people from the interior of Yemen? That was also ruled out because the assumption throughout this period was that Indians were better workers than the native Arab population. They had better skill for a variety of reasons. Certainly, they had more skills in stonework, working with stone and in construction. There was even a talk of bringing Chinese workers to build up Aden. In terms of so moving from and I'll try to wrap it up. Um, Moving from the workers, these Indian indentured workers to the actual to this sort of merchant class, there were a number of sort of contradictions that were built into their position in Aden. So they were often referred to as respectable and men of respectable men, and all of them were men. Respectable seems to have been essentially a euphemism for having a lot of savings. So they had enough capital to invest in various projects, various business endeavors. So they were respectable insofar as they had amassed a lot of money, but often the means in which they had amassed this money were quite dubious, and they could be quite ruthless in terms of their business practices. So there was this constant this sort of simultaneously doing favors and reliance upon respectable men, but also a well-founded suspicion that they were, often up to no good. The British, as they were in India, were very happy to sort of farm out any kind of development of public utilities and infrastructure and hospitals and educational institutions to have all of this sort of implicitly on the tab of local philanthropists. That is, that they were expected to do these things to fund these types of projects as a kind of as a in gratitude for for the status that they enjoyed under the British. But of course, they didn't make all that money by giving it away or by devoting it to the public good. So that was also a problem in Aden as it was in Bombay. Um, and also there was a question of their loyalties, right? So certainly Arabic speaking merchants could and did um, make separate deals with other Arabs and Arab authority figures in the interior of Yemen, whether the British wanted them to or not. This, in a sense, was one of the reasons why there were a certain, and my research is on these Jewish merchants, but one of the reasons that uh, um, the Jews were able to sort of parlay their unpopularity with the Arabs into a kind of de facto trust relationship with the British. Um, and then there were all sorts of there were all sorts of conflicts in between the merchants for these. The British were willing to pay for very pay large sums of money to find somebody, let's say, to supply the alcohol concession for all the hard drinking British military men who were in in Aden, not just alcohol, but also opium and ganja and khat, which is a kind of drug that is consumed in Yemen and parts of East Africa. These were all under concession from the British government. And various often Parsi merchants fought very intense battles and very dirty fights in order to get these concessions. And some of these ended up being used as some of this sort of malfeasance of the local merchants ended up being used as evidence against Haynes that he had sort of gone native in a sense that he was too part of the reason Aden was not working and needed new management was that Haynes was too solicitous of the local merchants, of the native merchants.
Um,
Um,
Mark, if I may interrupt, we are
yeah, yeah.
beyond the 7 o'clock, so if I could request you to,
Okay.
yeah, just
Yeah,
one.
yeah. So I can just wrap it up here. This is a picture, this is a photograph from much later period. The man in the fez in the middle is Benin Messa, who's the son of the Jew who ran the commissary for the British. After the Suez Canal opened in 1869, he invested the money that his father had made in all sorts of infrastructure all along the Red Sea and became really fabulously wealthy. And this is the Prince Edward on his way to India. This is a kind of popular photograph that Jews would have hung, Adeni Jews would have had hanging in their house. But it's an interesting image because it's essentially the king or the Prince of Wales arrived in Aden on a Saturday, which is a Jewish day of rest. So while all of the other great men of Aden, local wealthy men, greeted the prince at the pier, Benin Messa made him come to him, and so here he is at the King George V school for Jewish boys, flanked by all of the notables of the Jewish community, essentially kind of demonstrating his power as the sort of uh, uh, bridge troll of the of the mouth of the Red Sea. Um, yeah, and that I would just mention by way of wrapping it up, this early period of when Aden was something like 50% Indian, when the idea of an Indian city of Aden is very much a focus of nostalgia nowadays because of all of the series of essentially ongoing civil wars that have really destroyed the built environment since the mid 80s. So, for example, this is an Arabic novel called Steamer Point. That's just transliterated into Arabic, but you see on the one of the Yemeni version jacket cover of the novel by Ahmed Zain, who's over on the side of the picture, is a Yemeni writer who lives in Saudi Arabia. This is a postcard that tourists would have bought of the port of Aden in the let's say in the 1950s. So this cosmopolitan city, very Indian in orientation, cultural orientation, is a kind of something that not people who Yemenis who live through it look back wistfully at it, but also people like Ahmed Zain who never, are not old enough to have experienced it. Okay, so I'd be happy to take whatever questions you have.
Yes, of course. So there are plenty of questions. Thank you first and
Great.
foremost for quite an insightful look. And like you said, a part of it that we know may be more nostalgic than not, but I think you've given us a more realistic picture of what life was like in Aden. So yeah, there are a lot of questions in the chat box. If I may take them one by one from the beginning. So the first question is actually more of a comment talking about the fact that Yashpal believes that a lot of the coffee plantations in the Indian region of Coorg are primarily of Yemen origin. Would you have a comment on that?
These are coffee plantations in India.
Yes, in India, in the Karnataka
Uh,
state of Coorg, in the Coorg region in the Karnataka state.
yeah, I think that. mm, I mean, I think that there was a certain period in the Middle Ages when all coffee would have come from Yemen, from the highlands of Yemen, or and possibly from East Africa as well, from Ethiopia. But the Dutch actually smuggled some young trees. There's a kind of semi-apocryphal story about how the Dutch smuggled some young coffee plants out of Yemen in I think, sometime in the 18th century and got them to Java, right?
Ah,
So that is how that is how the Yemeni monopoly on coffee was broken. So yeah, I guess in terms of the plant itself, it originates in that region. And I should say that there were debates among Muslims about whether or not coffee was a drug. And there is quite a bit of literature on that. Yeah.
I guess that debate continues in part today as well, given how addictive it is. Yeah. Okay, and more questions coming in on who ruled Aden and or even Yemen prior to the European incursions in Yemen. I think you did refer to this, but just to reiterate the same.
There were a series of empires that ruled over Aden, and also it was it was it's an ancient there's an ancient I mentioned the tanks, so the tanks are the Tawila tanks are the main sort of pre-Islamic archaeological evidence but certainly there evidence that that a lot of energy was invested in Aden already at an ancient in ancient in pre-Islamic times. Yeah, but there were various attempts by Portuguese, by the Mamluks, by the Ottomans. Each sort of made attempts to take over. They took over the city. It just by the turn of the 19th century, it was Mocha was a much more important and there is one gets the sense that at either Mocha or Aden, one of those ports was active at any one time, but the two of them were never flourishing. Don't seem to have sort of flourished at the same time because they were close to one another. But yeah, I mean, I can, if anyone's interested, I can point you in the direction of, I should also mention that there were, Aden is kind of a Sufi center as well. So there are mosques and tombs that are associated with Sufi saints, and we're already associated with these figures and their families. Well, a long time before the British ever came.
So clearly, there's a fair amount of history predating the modern city of Aden, I would imagine.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, I'm going to combine the next two questions because I think they're connected. So, one, it starts with asking what was Aden's advantage over other than being a port, and the comment is that it doesn't seem to be as well connected to the populous areas or trade routes, and also what was attracting the Indian traders to Aden, and what commodities were passed through the city, etc.
Yeah, no, as far as I mean, there was a sort of established trade route between Western India and East Africa and Somalia. So they would have. I think I mentioned that the main thing that the Gujarati traders would load up their ships with, when weather allowing, when during the season when this journey was possible, they would load up their ships with cotton piece goods, and they would trade them with the various tribes in the interior of Somalia and also Ethiopia would come to the coast with to trade a lot of animal products. So at various points they were different products, but um, in a slightly later period, there was a fashion for ostrich feathers. Europeans really like to put ostrich feathers in their hats. So there were a lot of ostriches met their doom, supplying this market. There were even ostrich feather vendors who would sort of climb up the ropes that tied the ships to Aden Harbor and sell. This is a kind of one of the sort of postcard images from the turn of the 20th century of these people selling ostrich feathers in glass tubes to tourists on the ships. There was various sorts of gums, gum arabic and frankincense and myrrh that aromatic gums that could be burned or used in other ways. Pelts of leopards and a lot of skins from animals were used as the raw materials for leather industries or for fur industries in other parts of the world, like even in Greece. Greece was one of the centers of leather production. Ivory from elephants, gold. Some that sound very obscure. There was a substance that comes from the glands of a kind of cat called a civet, that is used. It's an essential ingredient in certain types of perfume. Uh, uh, so that was something that was traded, collected, and traded with one of the more valuable commodities
Oh,
that was used in this period.
interesting. So, of course, there is a
Yeah,
comment that Dhirubhai Ambani, who is a very, very
yeah,
famous industrialist in India, was worked in Aden for a while, but I'm guessing that was in the latter part of the 20th century rather than at the period you were talking about. But I don't know if you have.
yeah. Well, he worked for, there was a French coffee merchant named Antonin Bess. He initially made his fortune in coffee, but Bess also invested in like Aden Airways and all sorts of other projects. He was kind of jack of all trades, and yeah, and he used quite a few. He had quite a few sort of Indian and Arab middlemen. And yeah, and Ambani was one of his in the 50s, I think that's how he started his career was as a sort of low-level clerk for Antonin Bess. Ultimately, Antonin bequeathed at least some of his fortune to Oxford University, where they established St. Anthony's College, which is named after him. And that's where he made that money. But yeah, there was what was called the Aden business, and certainly that's what from what I've read, that's what one of the things, and this is not connected to commodities necessarily, but there was a lot of currency speculation that went on. And a lot of the business had to do with stockpiling certain or warehousing certain commodities, and then figuring out based on intelligence using the telegraph and other new technologies, figuring out which part of the Red Sea region was was paying the highest prices for these commodities, and getting them there in advance of your rivals. Uh,
It's fascinating, actually. So,
yeah.
okay, I just moving on to a few other questions. There was was the development of the coffee industry in Java and then later in South America responsible for the diminishing importance of the Mocha port?
I don't think directly. Yeah, I mean, there were a variety of. There is, as you can imagine, there's more written about there's quite a bit written about the coffee industry. There's a strong. People are interested in it, in coffee, as you mentioned, whether they want to be or not. But there were a variety of reasons for the decline in the coffee industry in Yemen. One of the main reasons is that there is another. I mentioned this khat, which is a kind of Khat is a plant that grows basically in the same elevation and climate as coffee plants, and it's very perishable. Like if you people in Yemen and in also in Kenya and Somalia chew the leaves and young stems of the khat plant, like during the day as a kind of social activity, and it has a sort of effect on the body, a pleasant effect on the brain. Um, and so most land, already the Ottomans in Yemen in the 19th century, or in the 19th century, the Ottomans were already lamenting how all of this, land that could be agricultural land that could be devoted to valuable cash crop, which is coffee, was being instead used for this, dubious activity of, growing kind of drugs for local consumption. And that's still, there's always this is a kind of leitmotif in reformist rhetoric in Yemen, that we should stop with our cod chewing and pull ourselves up by the britches and dig up all the cot trees and instead plant coffee and then sell it at at amazing profits around the world, and we will be prosperous. Of course, that's there are a lot of problems with that idea, but yeah, but no, certainly the coffee was an important and even for it to be there were various sorts of quality control techniques that were put into effect to sort of guarantee customers in Europe and America that the coffee that they were buying was certified mocha coffee, because there were a lot of attempts. Some people also made their fortunes essentially smuggling coffee from Bombay back to Yemen, uh, and then calling it mocha coffee. Just pretending.
That's quite the brand name. I'm just going
Yeah,
to
yeah.
make a couple of more comments, and I'll leave them as more comments than anything else because in the interest of time. But Milind does want to point out that Vasudev Balwant Phadke, who was a freedom fighter in India, was kept in a prison in Aden at a point in time. And also, Captain Mohan Narayan was pointing out about how the Industrial Revolution has led to ships using coal to make steam, and the opening of the Suez Canal gave a great fillip to maritime trade between Asia and Europe. Coal was not indigenous to Aden, but was imported by the British Empire and held in Aden at a great bunkering station for ships en route the two European and Asian ports. So I guess that's another commodity that sort of found its way into Aden just for supporting the shipping. So also, Sailesh has a comment to say it was nice to learn of the contributions from Gujaratis from Mumbai. And Neela was mentioning about the fact that she has had a chance to work in Aden as an architect consultant for a smart city project. And she was shuttling between Dubai and Aden, and the client was a Dubai-based Yemeni lady. With she has a lot of info from the lady about Yemen as well. So that was just a comment. And then, Firoza is pointing out the fact that there was a very thriving Parsi population, which you also mentioned. And the fact is that it was large enough that there was a fire temple and a Tower of Silence operational till the revolution. I'm guessing that's because it was a large enough population there. And that's about it. And other than that, everybody is actually very thankful for a very informative talk. And yes, because of time, they've had to leave, but they wanted to thank you for something that was very, very enjoyable and left for a lot of food for thought.
Thank you. So, would you like me to address these points, or should we just
It's up to you. If you find one of them is any of them are interesting enough, please do. Maybe another.
okay.
So.
Yeah, well, certainly the coal was as a bunkering station or as a fueling station for ships that ran on coal, steamships. Aden was there were various companies that English companies that essentially negotiated sweetheart deals with the British government in Aden. So there was, as there is, and there was a kind of very problematic intermingling of public and private funds in early Aden, and so very sort of choice parcels of land in the port were given at an early period to, for example, the Luke Thomas Company, which brought coal from Wales to Aden, imported it with the assumption or let's say hope on the part of the British that if they ever ran short of coal or needed coal for their for their ships, these private companies would surely be willing and able to return the favors that had been done for them. I should say one of the Somali workers in Aden were, in some sense, the most despised, I guess, by some of the other groups who were working in Aden. And one of the Somalis tended to find one of the characteristic jobs that they found was as what are called firemen. So firemen are men who work on not on what are called tramp steamers, like very small steamships, shoveling coal into the engines. And as you can imagine, this is very hot. Periodically, they would be overcome with the heat and have to be cooled down in sort of baths of very cold water. But this is this work of so because of these firemen, these sort of Somali and also Yemeni Arab firemen, there are this is the genesis of sort of the earliest Arab Arab settlements in Wales in the United Kingdom of these what are they were in hindsight they're called Adenese, but they were Somalis and Arabs who had this sort of terrible job on board tramp steamers. As far, yeah, and the Parsi, there was several very prominent Parsi families. Kawasti Dinshaw is the name that comes up the most. As a sort of philanthropist for the community, who built all sorts of religious infrastructure for the Parsi community in Aden. Um, and then Kawashi Dinshaw was actually one of the people when Aden was ultimately in the 1920s, when there were debates about whether Aden should remain part of British India or should be switched to the jurisdiction of the colonial office in England. A lot of local Indian merchants like Kawashi Dinshaw spoke very passionately against this idea. This was not a popular idea among Indians, either in Aden or in India. Uh, um,
I think that largely covers all the questions. And I would like to personally say that it was a very, very interesting and intriguing talk. Plus, you did build up quite a few pictures for us. So, gave us a good sense of how thriving the life in Eden would have been at one point in time. So, thank you so much. And yeah, I guess everybody, once again, from everybody, a big thanks for the talk. And if there are no more questions, then maybe we can close the talk out. So, thank you so much for that.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Bye.